TV, radio and online, Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512,
Virgin Media Channel 604,
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236
and YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB+ radio,
with the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing! You see, amazing!
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel. Magnificent.
That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
Join me, Lawrence Fox, on GB News. Frank, fun, fearless and sometimes serious, much as I love a Friday night punch-up, what I really want is a battle of ideas. I want to look at things differently. I want to hear different voices and engage with your unique experiences. Every Friday at 7 p.m. on GB News.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
Why not take us home with you by visiting the GB News shop at gbnews.store. You'll find all the official merchandise, a really good present actually for yourself, your friends or your family.
We ship across the UK mainland at no extra cost. GB News, the People's Channel.
Join me, Patrick Christys, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m, Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Good morning. Welcome to Bev Turner today on TV and DAB radio. We're expecting the very first police press conference regarding Nicola Bulley's disappearance during the show. But with some relatively good news. Inflation has slowed for the third month in a row. So how come we aren't feeling it at the tills yet? Jeremy Hunt has said that the fight against inflation is far from over. Does it feel like he's on your side? Let me know. We've got a GB News exclusive report on the people smugglers' new attempts to dodge French police patrols. Plus Mike Parry and Tonya Buxton to go through the papers and discuss, amongst other things, Chinese surveillance and a 100% effective male contraceptive pill. Would you trust that? All to come after your latest news with Bethany.
Bev, thank you. Good morning. It's 1 minute past 10. I'm Bethany Elsey with your top stories from the GB newsroom. The Labour leader has apologised on behalf of the party for its handling of anti-Semitism complaints under his predecessor, Jeremy Corbyn. Sir Keir Starmer also confirmed Mr Corbyn will not stand for Labour at the next general election. It comes as the Equality and Human Rights Commission announced it will end its monitoring of the party 2 years after a report into anti-Semitism complaints. The watchdog demanded Labour make changes after finding it was responsible for unlawful acts of harassment and discrimination.
To all those who were hurt, to all those who were let down, to all those driven out of our party who no longer felt it was their home, who suffered the most appalling abuse. Today, on behalf of the entire Labour Party, I say sorry. What you've been through can never be undone. Apologies alone cannot make it right.
The rate of UK inflation has fallen for the third month in a row, but remains in double digits. Data from the Office for National Statistics shows the Consumer Price Index fell to 10.1% in January, down from 10.5% in December. The drop was largely due to the price of fuel and transport slowing. Chancellor Jeremy Hunt says the fight to reduce inflation is far from over. A boy and a girl, both aged 15, have been charged with the murder of a 16-year-old girl who was stabbed to death in Cheshire. Brianna Jai from Warrington was found seriously injured on a pavement near a park on Saturday afternoon. She died a short time later. Cheshire Police says they're exploring whether the teen, who was transgender, was the victim of a hate crime. Candlelit vigils have been held in Bristol and in Liverpool in her memory. A 19-month-old girl has been successfully treated for a fatal genetic disease with the world's most expensive drug. Teddy Shaw from Northumberland suffers from a rare inherited disease called MLD, which causes serious damage to the nervous system and organs, dramatically cutting life expectancy. She is the first person in the UK to be given the treatment, which has a list price of £2.8 million. But her 3-year-old sister, who also has the condition, is too advanced to benefit from the treatment. School unions are warning the Education Secretary must make teachers a concrete pay offer to prevent further strikes going ahead in England. Gillian Keegan will meet union leaders today in a bid to resolve the pay dispute. The National Education Union is planning action in England as well as in Wales this month and next. More than 41,000 people are known to have died in earthquakes which struck southern Turkey and northern Syria last week. Rescue workers are continuing to find survivors. Last night, a 77-year-old woman was pulled from the rubble alive after being trapped for more than 8 days. Syria's president says he'll open 2 more border crossings so emergency aid can reach opposition-controlled areas. The Defence Secretary says the UK should rethink how much it's willing to spend on defence amid the increasing threat from Russia. Speaking ahead of a meeting with his NATO counterparts in Brussels, Ben Wallace also said Western allies could help Ukraine more quickly by supporting their position on the ground, rather than focusing on supplying jets. It's after Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky toured London, Paris and Brussels in an effort to secure fighter planes for his country. The White House now says it doesn't think 3 high-altitude objects that were shot down by the military at the weekend are linked to China. One object was downed over Alaska, another over Canada's Yukon territory, and a third was shot down over Lake Huron in Michigan. US intelligence believes the unidentified objects could be commercial and that they're likely benign. It's after concerns they could be linked to a suspected Chinese spy balloon that was shot down off the coast of South Carolina 11 days ago. And the Launcher 1 rocket failed to reach orbit in January because of a fuel filter dislodged, causing an engine to overheat. Virgin Orbit's chief executive Dan Hart says the company will proceed cautiously towards the launch of its next rocket. The satellite mission was the first of its kind from the UK. And some breaking news. We're just hearing Scotland's First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, is to hold an urgent press conference at 11 o'clock. We'll bring you the latest as we get it. You're up to date on TV, online and DAB plus radio. This is GB News. Now, though, it's back to Bev.
Welcome to Bev Turner today. This is live TV and the latest news is that Nicola Sturgeon is expected to resign as Scottish First Minister after 8 years in charge. The Scottish National Party leader is expected to hold a news conference at 11 o'clock this morning in just under an hour, and we will, of course, bring you that live. Tom Harwood joins me now. Good morning, Tom. You came off air. This hadn't happened. That was, what, 7 minutes ago? Yeah. This has come out of the blue somewhat, or not?
Somewhat out of the blue, and I've just been asking around some sources north of the border to see exactly what's going on here, because there are a couple of things that are in the play, in the mix. There was one poll last week that showed support for independence, for partition of the United Kingdom, has crashed down to just below 40%, much, much lower than it was during the peak, during those Scottish lockdowns that we saw support really, really rise. Yeah. So clearly support for Nicola Sturgeon's cause has been dimming, but also there are many questions within the SNP, which has always traditionally been an incredibly united party, presenting a very united front, almost to the state of a very unusual lack of internal dissent. We've started to see some more internal dissent sort of bubbling up. Nicola Sturgeon, of course, has been First Minister since 2014, quite a long time at the helm, and there are some voices within her party who have been sort of gently saying that potentially it's time to move on. And thirdly, there is this question that has been bubbling up in the last week or so of this ongoing questions around a missing £600,000 that the SNP has raised since 2017 to fight an independence referendum. And yet that £600,000 seems to have gone missing from the SNP's accounts. So there are many, many questions around that and a probe that has begun.
Do we know who the donor was of that?
That is crowdfunded through multiple donations that explicitly for the cause of an independence referendum, but doesn't seem to have ended up in that pot, and we're not sure where it's gone or what it's been spent on. So there are questions around that could also be factoring into this. Ultimately, there are those big, big factors playing into what is, to some people, a very welcome announcement, to others, a very shocking announcement. Yeah. No one at the beginning of today was necessarily expecting this.
Absolutely. There was an article on The Spectator, I think, only from about 5 hours ago, saying that she was living on borrowed time. It looks slightly prescient now. Of course, she's been embroiled in this gender self-declaration maelstrom. It really came down to this one case which really caught the public's imagination of Isla Bryson. This is the transgender double rapist. And the question was whether when they should go into a female prison, which kind of put Nicola Sturgeon in the middle of this kind of moral and political quagmire with the Gender Recognition Reform Bill, which, of course, Rishi Sunak and the UK Parliament blocked because they said it would damage women's rights under the UK Equality Act. Do you think it will be that this is what has pushed her over the edge, Tom?
I think undoubtedly this is a factor in what's going on. Nicola Sturgeon looked flustered in an interview a couple of weeks ago around this question. Is this particular individual a rapist who only after being charged suddenly decided that they might be transgender? Nicola Sturgeon, in the way that she responded to that, has come under a lot of criticism. Normally, she's a very adept media performer, but under questioning over this issue, she seemed to get rattled, she seemed to get flustered, she seemed like the shine had come off. Now, it's important that we emphasise the situation of this particular prisoner is a separate question from the self-ID legislation that was going through the Scottish Parliament, because that's not so much to do with prisons, but the question of this individual, this rapist, was sort of happening at the same time and all got tied up in the same narrative.
And if I've understood this correctly, I think the gender self-declaration would have allowed Isla Bryson to have identified quite quickly as a woman by law, and therefore could have gone into a women's prison, even though the crime was committed when they were Adam Graham, their dead name.
So actually, as the law stands since 2004, transgender people do not need a GRC, a gender recognition certificate, to go into another prison. The GRC isn't a sort of passport to go from one prison to the other. And actually, as things were standing, we must remember there isn't GRC reform in Scotland. That was blocked by Westminster. And yet still this individual was expected and was being planned to go into a woman's prison. So that was the situation before debate around self-ID. But yet what clearly was supposed to happen was a system of individual assessment. And the big political criticism here is that the assessment was not going well. Many people think that this individual is not transgender, is faking it, has only suddenly decided to do this after being charged with violent crime.
They would, of course, say the opposite, I guess. Scots agreed with the UK government about 2 to 1, I think, in order to not push this bill and for the UK government to block it. What detail do you think we will get from her? So if you're just joining us now, Nicola Sturgeon, we believe, is going to make a statement at 11 o'clock to announce her resignation. Knowing her character, Tom, how do you think she will announce her departure? Is she the kind of character that will blame other people? Will she go so far as to blame Rishi Sunak?
I think that we'll see a very defensive statement from Nicola Sturgeon. She's someone, excuse me,
like my water.
Who has, that would actually
You have been on TV for half an hour before this, which is
thank you very much.
You know, she's not known for necessarily. She comes out swinging, doesn't she, Nicola?
She certainly does. I mean, I've run into her on a number of occasions. I chased her through a COP26 sort of 14 months ago, and she was not really happy to answer many questions from me at that time. But similarly, she's known to have quite a tight media operation around her, a very close-knit circle of advisors. There's been a lot of criticism that the way in which the SNP and its executive is run is by her and her husband, who's the chief exec of the SNP, and a very tight group of people. We saw, of course, when Nicola Sturgeon was being accused of wrongdoing by Alex Salmond and that sort of inquiry that went on within Holyrood just over a year ago. We saw how very many of Nicola Sturgeon's closest advisors have sort of acted to create this sort of protective ring around her. And I think to some extent we're going to see a lot of that same defensiveness today from Nicola Sturgeon.
She pretty much said that she was going to turn the 2024 general election into a de facto referendum, didn't she, on independence? Will Rishi Sunak this morning be breathing a sigh of relief that she's no longer the First Minister? I guess it depends who's waiting in the wings.
Well, interestingly, I spoke to a number of Conservative members of the Scottish Parliament after that announcement from Nicola Sturgeon, who were breathing a sigh of relief. They believed that actually the idea that the SNP would brand a general election as a de facto referendum would help them against the party's wider prospects. And so Conservative Conservative members of Parliament in Scotland who sit in more marginal seats thought that they were safer because they'd be able to say, look, you've got to back me if you're a unionist, no matter what's going on with the party and how it's run in Westminster. Now, I think that whoever takes the lead of the SNP after this, because of course the conversation will very quickly turn to who are the potential people who are going to stand for this position. What's their vision going to be in terms of leading the SNP? It's going to be very unlikely that there's someone who is less adamantly in favour of independence. If anything, we might well see a hardening of the SNP's stance, potentially some people from the wing of the party that has been pushing for an illegal referendum. They might be a large voice in the conversation that is about to happen within that party. And clearly there will be people standing for the leadership who are trying to really make a case for a very radical membership. So we might well see a shift in the way that this party is run and in its tactics away from, if you can describe Nicola Sturgeon in any way as moderate, but we might see an even greater sense of radicalism from a new leader.
She's obviously such a powerful figure. She's such an identifiable figure in the British media. Who is waiting in the wings, do you think? Who we might know of, we might recognise their face, we might know their names. Who might be taking her place, do you think? Who might be in the running for that role?
There are some really big names, of course. Some who have represented the SNP in Westminster and have returned up to Holyrood in the last elections. There are also some people who have been perceived to be closer to Nicola Sturgeon and some who have been perceived to be further away from Nicola Sturgeon. So a lot of names in the mix. Some of the big ones that we might well be thinking of are the new finance minister who was installed by Sturgeon just a couple of years ago. She might be very well a name that wants to throw her hat in the ring. But also there's the constitutional minister within the SNP's Scottish government as well. There are some people who would be seen to be more on the Sturgeon side of things and other people who would be seen to be on the other side of things. We might well see sort of a token campaign from those around the Joanna Cherry faction within the party, who are much more on the gender-critical side of things. There were a small minority of SNP MPs who voted against that gender reform bill in Scotland as well. Maybe they will make themselves known with a candidate too.
OK, all right, thank you, Tom. According to the latest breaking headlines, the Scottish National Party leader is expected to make an announcement at about 11 o'clock this morning in Edinburgh. The First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, expected to resign at 11. Stay with me right here on GB News for continued reaction to this breaking news. See you in a minute.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "Nana, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hi, Andrew Pearce here. Join me every Friday lunchtime for a proper no-nonsense debrief of the week's events. With special guests in the studio and the GB News team on the ground, I'll be getting you up to date with news, some intelligent discussion and my own sharp take. The weekend starts here with me every Friday lunchtime on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christys, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Bev Turner today on GB News. It is 10:20 a.m. My panel are here to discuss, of course, the biggest breaking news story this morning. A political commentator, Tonya Buxton, and broadcaster and journalist Mike Parry. Thank you so much, both of you. Yeah. Well, we came on air this morning. We had a whole programme planned, and now we've ripped it up, and we're starting again, Tonya Buxton. The demise of Nicola Sturgeon. We're expecting her resignation speech at 11 o'clock. If you're just joining us, thoughts?
Can I do a dance?
You're very happy about it.
Can I do a little dance? Oh, she's gone. She's got... The woman was... no, in my opinion, the woman was unstable. And everything that she did was to kind of push her political career further. She did not think about the Scottish people. She did not think about Scottish women. She was a complete lockdown, COVID madwoman. And she's done so much damage to Scotland that I'm so glad she's finally gone.
Now, we have to just be clear that that's a very personal opinion
I said,
of
in
yours,
my opinion.
as you did, as you said. I think there's quite a lot there that I would agree with.
Yeah.
There's very few times that Nicola Sturgeon would say anything that I would agree with.
Yeah.
But having said that, Mike, she is a very shrewd political operator, a strategist, a Rottweiler who gets a goal in her sights and makes things happen.
Well, look, Tonya has just expressed a very strong opinion about Nicola Sturgeon. I'll give you a few facts to back up what Tonya said. So, the most recent poll, 42% of people only supporting her. But do you know why? What about the policy she's brought in? You are absolutely right as well, Bev. Her single ambition in life was to be the woman who'll go down in history that brought independence to Scotland.
Yeah.
I've been saying for years, an independent Scotland cannot possibly support itself fiscally. It doesn't have the sort of industry that can support a country on its own. Now, just a few other things. They've got shortages in some shops in Scotland. They're on the islands because she didn't get round to building the ferries that she was supposed to build. They all got rotten and wrecked, and there's no way people can get around. Glasgow Council only last week announced we're going to have to lay off 800 teachers because of the mismanagement of the SNP in that mighty city. What did she do? Turned around and said, I'm banning it. You'll hire more teachers, OK?
Without giving them any more money to do that.
Exactly. That's exactly what I'm saying. I mean, Scotland's a basket case. If you look at the education policies, they've gone down massively over the last 10 years. If you look at the drug problem in their major cities, Edinburgh and Glasgow...
That's the big one.
That's the big one, and it's probably...
Which she has not addressed.
It's probably the worst in Europe. Can you believe that they were even considering hammering one of their most successful industries, which is Scotch whisky, exported all around the world, but they're having a debate about whether to ban alcohol advertising in Scotland? I mean, what kind of a basket case had it become?
Well, she wanted to rush through this deposit return scheme, didn't she, as well, for single-use containers?
Yep.
Which, you know, it might be a laudable aim, but it was considered to be a bit of a disaster before it even begun. She's obviously attempted to ban petrol and diesel cars. Again, you might agree with that. Poorly executed. They've had to push that 2030 target date for the ban on fossil fuel vehicles now. That's been ripped up. The proposal to outlaw gas central heating boilers in new build homes as early as 2025.
Yeah.
She was wanting to do that. That's gone as well. It might be easy, Tonya, to think that this is all about the transgender issue that she's been currently admired within, but actually the problems go back a lot longer, don't they?
They really do go back a lot longer. And ultimately, if you are ruling someone, you've been given the vote. And I think the problem is that she got all the Labour votes as well. And I don't think that she was necessarily... She's not for the working class person.
No.
For me, the worst thing that's going on in Scotland is the drug problem, especially with the young people there. And she's just not devoted any time.
Or resources.
Or resources, and she just brushes it under the carpet.
Yep.
And that's what's killing young people now. It's killing them now. And she's done nothing about that.
Yeah.
I mean, I really am trying very hard to give both sides of the argument and try and think of one thing that she's done that was actually good. And I'm struggling with it. I'm struggling to come up with anything.
And also, politically, you say she was very shrewd and all that. The shrewd bit was she'd always blamed it on Westminster Tory austerity. She knew full well that no matter how mad her policies became and how bankrupt she made the country, at the end of the day, the taxpayers from the southeast of England were going to have to bail the country out.
Yeah.
Otherwise, the Union was in even more trouble if you had a rebellious country in Scotland because of her failed policies. Everything she's touched has gone completely wrong. I might sound that I'm, bitterly attacking the woman, but I'm a unionist. And I want the union to stay together, and she spent the last couple of decades of her life trying to prise it apart, and I can't forgive her for that. And also, the Barnett formula is designed, isn't it, to give Scottish people a very good deal in relation to the English taxpayer, and she still couldn't make it work.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you're completely right. She has the opposite of the Midas touch.
Yes, she does.
Literally,
she does.
Opposite to doing that. But the main thing about our leaders at the moment is they seem to be just politically driven. Like you said, she wanted to be the woman that made Scotland independent, irrelevant of what it did to the Scottish people. And that's the most important thing.
Yeah.
I think that our politicians, all politicians, need to go through some kind of psychological analysis to make sure that what they're doing is for the good of the people, because it doesn't seem to be that way anymore. It just doesn't feel that way at all.
We've got this potential issue about some missing money, Mike. It's still breaking news, this. Tom mentioned it there, that there might have been £600,000 that has gone missing.
Is this related to her husband's role in the party? Because that's another issue as well.
I think that's a slightly different issue, actually. I think he is... Nicola Sturgeon's husband husband is facing questions over SNP's finances. The police have stepped up their investigation into potential fundraising fraud.
That's right.
That's, I believe, about £60,000 that's gone missing.
Yeah.
We don't know. This is a very much...
Whenever money gets mentioned in political circles, to be honest, I just thought it just goes over my head because it's a constant. What I look for in a politician is, were you employing these policies to make a better life for the people you represent, or were you employing these policies so that one day there'd be a statue of you in the town square in Glasgow saying you became the woman who gave us independence? And undoubtedly with, I mean, Private Eye called her Wee Bernie, didn't they? And I'm not calling her Wee Bernie, but that's an indication from a satirical political magazine of how she was viewed, you know, internationally, really. Wee Bernie, you know, clumping around in her high heels and issuing policy statements here, policy statements there, without ever thinking about them being funded properly. And consequently, Scotland, a really great country, magnificent country, has gone down the tubes.
According to a source apparently close to the First Minister, in quotes, she's had enough. This is what they're saying. She's just had enough. And she's choosing to resign now, I guess, in order maybe to put somebody else in charge of her party in the run-up to the election if she knows she's sufficiently unpopular. In that regard, it might be that she's falling on her sword for the sake of the party, Tonya.
No, she sounds just like Jacinda.
He does.
I was going to say,
exactly the same.
Exactly
the same. No fuel left in the tank.
Real parallels there. These kind of... And it upsets me that it's women, because I always think of women as being far more sensible, no offence, Mike, than men, and just and the more caring, you know, gender.
Well, she has been there for nearly 10 years, I guess.
But yes, but she's now... The reason that she's going is because she knows that she's become so dreadfully unpopular that she won't make it again.
No.
So, like, she's had enough, all of that. That's not the case.
And, of course, she won't achieve devolution because the more unpopular she comes, the more unpopular her policies become. One very laudable policy I recall from about a year ago, she wanted to get £800 million of funding for social care, you know, to get rid of the bed blockers. I think she scrapped that in favour of something else that came onto the, you know, radar that needed a big blocking of funds, you know?
She did do an interview not long ago where she said she wasn't in any rush to resign. That was only a matter of weeks ago, which very much raises the question, what has happened? Are we going to get a big revelation? If you're just joining us, Nicola Sturgeon is due to make a resignation speech in just over half an hour on about 11 o'clock, so stay with us here. She's going to be in Edinburgh, apparently. We will take that live, of course. Do you think, Tonya, that this transgender issue, because I know we've covered this a lot on the show, and her Gender Recognition Reform Act was the first time when she was responding to those questions where she looked, as Tom said before, she looked very flustered. She didn't know how to answer that. You can't help but think she was starting to regret walking into that particular moral storm.
She was doing something that she thought was populist. It's kind of this kind of... It's a woke agenda, isn't it? Whether we like that word or not, it's a woke agenda. It doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense to put... convicted rapists with all their tackle into a female prison. I mean, and there was no way she could get out of that. It doesn't make... A lot of the things, you know, how can you... A lot of these kids that are going through this at the moment are actually suffering with psychological problems, and they're not getting any of the help they want because they can just walk into someone and say, now I'm a boy, now I'm a girl, and that's it. So it's so problematic. It was so wrong. And like you said, she sat in front of that interview and she just looked like she didn't know what she was talking about.
And it clearly hasn't resonated with the people, that issue, with the public. Like, I think there are a lot of public who still have a lot of questions on that issue.
Look.
And she was failing to answer them satisfactorily.
The Scottish people are renowned for their common sense. For years, they had a better education system than we had in England because they retained grammar schools, and, you know, Gordon Brown and people like that had the benefit of fantastic education in that part of the world. But she narrowly lost a majority, didn't she, in the last set of elections in Scotland, so she couldn't actually get anything through on the SNP ticket. That was the start of the end for her. And the interview you're talking about, was it just last week or 10 days ago? The chap from ITV, the political editor of ITV in Scotland, I've never seen a politician quiver and collapse in 5 minutes on a policy like that. But she knows now she's not untouchable. And for the first 5 years she was around, she thought she was completely untouchable.
Yeah.
But that's the problem, that the fact that they feel they're untouchable and not accountable.
Exactly.
All our politicians should be accountable to us, the people that vote them in.
Yeah.
Well, she'll now be identifying as being unemployed from about half an hour's time. We will be bringing you this live. She's due to speak in Edinburgh at 11 o'clock. So please do stay here with us on GB News. We will take that speech, continued coverage of Nicola Sturgeon's resignation. Also at 11:30 this morning, we'll be live at the press conference as police give their first press conference, an update on the missing mother, Nicola Bulley. Find out what else we're going to be talking about after your morning news.
Bev, thank you. Good morning. It's just after 10:30. I'm Bethany Elsey with your top stories from the GB newsroom. And as you've been hearing, some breaking news this morning. Nicola Sturgeon is expected to resign as First Minister of Scotland after 8 years in power. An urgent press conference will be held from her residence at Bute House in Edinburgh at 11 o'clock. And of course, we'll bring that to you live here on GB News. Further details about if she will remain in the role until a successor is appointed is for now unknown. But of course, we'll bring you more on this story as it happens. The Labour leader has apologised on behalf of the party for its handling of anti-Semitism complaints under his predecessor, Jeremy Corbyn. Sir Keir Starmer also confirmed Mr Corbyn will not stand for Labour at the next general election. It comes as the Equality and Human Rights Commission announced it will end its monitoring of the party 2 years after a report into anti-Semitism complaints. The watchdog demanded Labour make changes after finding it responsible for unlawful acts of harassment and discrimination.
To all those who were hurt, to all those who were let down, to all those driven out of our party who no longer felt it was their home, who suffered the most appalling abuse. Today, on behalf of the entire Labour Party, I say sorry. What you've been through can never be undone. Apologies alone cannot make it right.
The rate of UK inflation has fallen for the third month in a row, but remains in double digits. Data from the Office for National Statistics shows the Consumer Price Index fell to 10.1% in January, down from 10.5% in December. The drop was largely due to the price of fuel and transport slowing. Chancellor Jeremy Hunt says the fight to reduce inflation is far from over. And a boy and a girl, both aged 15, have been charged with the murder of a 16-year-old girl who was stabbed to death in Cheshire. Brianna Jai from Warrington was found seriously injured on a pavement near a park on Saturday afternoon. She died a short time later. Cheshire Police says they're exploring whether the teen, who was transgender, was a victim of a hate crime. You're up to date on TV, online and DAB+ radio. This is GB News. Bev will be back with you in just a moment.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512,
Virgin Media Channel 604,
Freesat Channel 216,
Freeview Channel 236,
and YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB+ radio,
with the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8".
My instincts was to sort of cover this up. I mean, clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
There's a guy who went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions. I have no time for cultural totalitarianism. We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Co.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Co. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
Good morning, it's 10:36. This is Bev Turner today on GB News. If you're just joining us, Scotland's First Leader, Nicola Sturgeon, is expected to resign after 8 years in charge. The SNP leader, the First Minister, is expected to hold a news conference at 11 o'clock this morning, and we will, of course, bring you that live. I'm joined now by John Curtis, Professor of Politics at the University of Strathclyde. Good morning, John. Are you with us?
Good morning.
John, thank you for joining us at such late notice. Now, where was Nicola Sturgeon in the polls? You're a political expert and also a polling expert. Where was she until this morning? How was she doing?
Well, it depends on how you look at it. I mean, the truth is that Nicola Sturgeon remains the most popular of the party leaders in Scotland by far. Her party is still running at around 44-45% in the opinion polls for the Westminster election, which is roughly what it achieved in 2019. And to that extent, at least, one might wonder why she would want to resign. However, her personal popularity is now lower than it was. It frankly received quite a substantial boost during the COVID pandemic, where she was thought to have led the difficult 2 years very well and more effectively than Boris Johnson. But that has been gradually in decline. And she's been in a position where now kind of roughly half the country thinks she's doing okay, but the other half don't. But as compared with recent standards, not so good. But I suspect in the end that the reasons for her resignation won't lie so much in her personal popularity, whatever, but the fact that it was becoming clear that she was struggling to continue to maintain control over the strategic direction of her party on the issue of independence. Now, of course, when the Supreme Court said in November that the Scottish Parliament could not hold an independence referendum on its own volition, then Nicola Sturgeon was forced to say, well, she was going to pursue her plan B. And her plan B was the idea of holding, regarding the next UK general election, as a de facto referendum. In other words, if over half of Scots were to vote for the SNP, she would regard that as a mandate to negotiate for independence. Well, the trouble is quite a few of her MPs in particular were none too happy with this idea. They were concerned about the possible impact on their ability at the next election. And more broadly, there was concern as to whether or not actually this was a realistic way of pursuing the independence cause, and that perhaps actually what the SNP needed to do rather more was to focus on trying to persuade more people in Scotland of the merits of independence. And that figure still seems to be somewhat less than half. So there is a party conference, or at least there was a party conference due to take place next month. And there are a number of amendments down suggesting that maybe the party should go in a different direction. Now, that may be, in the end, the real pressure point for Nicola Sturgeon, rather than, for example, some of the difficulties over the gender recognition bill, or indeed, of course, certainly perhaps the fact that after 8 years she feels she's given it a good shot and maybe it's time to move on.
John, what will happen now? If in 20 minutes' time, as we're expecting, she announces her resignation, what will be the next steps?
Well, if she were to resign as First Minister today, a successor will have to be appointed within 28 days, or the Scottish Parliament is automatically dissolved. So if she were to do that, there will be a very tight pressure on her party to come to decisions soon. It's therefore, I think, more likely that she will announce that she intends to resign once her party has come up with a successor as leader, which, much the same way as Boris Johnson did back at the beginning of July. But that will therefore mean that there is then an internal election inside the SNP. I doubt there'll be a coronation. There isn't an obvious successor. And I think what we can expect during that election is a debate about how the SNP should be trying to pursue its strategic goal of independence. And to that extent, at least, the SNP perhaps is going to spend a lot of time talking to itself in the next few weeks rather than to the wider public. And I think probably the opposition parties will regard that as good news for them. And the Labour Party in particular, of course, who has its conference in Scotland this weekend. We're hoping that perhaps they can persuade rather more voters than they have done so far, who are currently supporting the SNP, that perhaps they should back Labour instead.
So you would expect, Sir John, that she would probably still be leader, de facto leader, at the party conference next month?
Well, I think there must now be a question mark as to whether or not that conference goes ahead.
Right.
It's my immediate reaction to it, but we will have to see. I mean, of course, if she were to resign straight away today as First Minister, then frankly, a new person would have to be in place by the time of that conference anyway.
Can you see any situation under which she would resign today? If there is anything that is a little more scurrilous in the background, we've got Tom Harwood's going to be back in the studio in just a moment to let us know whether there is any perhaps truth to these rumours about missing party funds. Is that the circumstances under which she might resign today?
Well, there have been stories about the way in which funds that were meant to be used in order to promote the cause of independence got used in order to promote the SNP's cause, although it's claimed that money has been repaid. There are also stories about the fact that her husband, Peter Murrell, who's the General Secretary of the SNP, lent money to the party, something about which Ms Sturgeon said she did not know anything and was entirely her husband's personal decision. Now, inevitably in politics, when there appears to be stories about money of doubtful origin or doubtful expenditure, these often get pursued by journalists. They have been pursued. They've not always been resolved satisfactorily in the eyes of some. But whether or not there is anything to be seen beyond perhaps miscommunication and perhaps some doubtful loaning of money for one purpose for another, I think, frankly, we don't know.
I'm looking on Twitter at the moment to see whether, for instance, the leader of the Scottish Conservatives, Douglas Ross, MSP, has made a statement yet. He hasn't. But would this come as good news to somebody like Douglas Ross?
Yes, the honest truth is that Nicola Sturgeon is by far and away the most effective politician that the SNP have at the moment. There isn't an obvious successor. There isn't anybody who has clear popularity with the electorate. They have some solid performers. John Swinney who is the Deputy First Minister, is a solid performer, but he's already tried being leader of the SNP and wasn't very successful. There's been a lot of discussion that Kate Forbes, the Finance Secretary, would be the person who would ultimately succeed Nicola Sturgeon, but she's still on maternity leave, and this doesn't exactly come at the ideal time personally for her. And she's certainly got to demonstrate that she's got an ability to talk to the wider public as opposed to impress Hollywood insiders. And beyond that, frankly, it's not entirely clear. I think many people would say that the group of people who are currently inside the Scottish Cabinet, person for person, don't contain the same degree of calibre that Alex Salmond had in his cabinet before 2014. That was a group of unusually talented people that I don't think can necessarily be said about the current SNP front bench.
You're going to be a man in demand today, Sir John. That's your mobile phone ringing in the background. Just one last question then. How will she be remembered, Nicola Sturgeon, as the longest-serving leader of the SNP, the longest-serving First Minister of Scotland, as well, since she hit that target, I think, in May 22. How will she be remembered?
I think there'll be two ways in which she'll be remembered positively by her party and by the country. By the party, for the fact that she turned her party and led her party to becoming a significant presence at Westminster for the first time in its history and become the third biggest party at Westminster. That was the product of the 2015 general election. So far as the country is more broadly is concerned, I think she was widely respected for the leadership that she provided the country during the COVID pandemic, and she emerged out of that much more effectively than Boris Johnson. The downside, at least for our party, is that it's not entirely clear that the party is any closer in delivering independence now than it was when Nicola Sturgeon first became First Minister in the autumn of 2014.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Sir John Curtis there, Professor of Politics at the University of Strathclyde, and a man who will no doubt spend a lot of today telling the public all about this. If you're just joining us, First Minister Nicola Sturgeon is expected to resign. We're going to take that live in about 14 minutes. Do not go anywhere. You have been getting in touch to let me know your thoughts on this. Thank you very much. Carol has says, not a day too soon. She'd lost the plot. Final straw was the trans debate, but the cutting off the school during COVID, cutting off the school doors during COVID sealed her fate. For me, Judy says, at last, I reside in the Scottish borders. This is the best news ever. Jules says, good riddance, and let's hope Scotland gets a First Minister with honesty, integrity and vision. A lot of you being quite excited about this. Tonya Buxton, what did you make of John Curtis's analysis of the situation there?
Oh, I think it's so flawed, because all this whole thing about how she dealt with lockdown better than Boris did blows my mind. This is a woman that wore a mask, even though all the science said don't wear a mask. This is the woman that...
Outdoors. She was even wearing them.
She was even wearing them outdoors. The woman that, as I said, cut off doors in schools. She shut down schools. I think she dealt with it horribly, and it just shows you the spin of the people in the media that want to make her look good in it. She was far worse, and actually because of her and because of the things that she did, we, because we had weak leaders ourselves, ended up putting mask mandates onto our children. I mean, it's abhorrent. So what does he mean by that? And the other thing I wanted to ask you is, just correct me, because I'm not political and you are, so you tell me. The Scottish people voted, did they not to be independent?
Yeah.
So much like Brexit, once living in a democracy, when the people vote for something, why is that not then left alone and move on?
It was the once-in-a-generation thing, and that's what everybody said. And you're so right about the way she led this country by the nose, because she had access to information in Whitehall about things that might happen next, goes back to Scotland, suddenly announces, then all of a sudden... the Westminster government is trailing behind her, trying to catch up with policies she's announcing, but weren't necessarily her own. And you're absolutely right. We'd still be locked down now if it was down to Nicola Sturgeon, really, until we got down to 0 cases of COVID. I just wonder, by the way, talk to the professor there, and Tonya, you'll know more about this than me, is that process to replace her so complicated, so complex, and so lacking in anybody else that she might hope to even resurrect her career within this programme to replace her by somebody coming up and saying, actually, there isn't anybody to replace her?
That's worrying. That's really worrying. And
but is it possible?
I believe it is possible, and the problem is with that is that she is the SNP.
Yes,
we
exactly.
can't think of any. Can you think of any other politicians that would come to mind?
I don't know the name of any others.
We were all saying that, weren't we? That actually, because she's been such a dominant force in Scottish politics for so long, that she's cast everybody into a shadow of anonymity, effectively, for 8 years.
That's right.
And now there is an opportunity for other people within the SNP to come forward. We just heard some names there: Kate Forbes, Angus Robertson. Robertson is also the Constitution Secretary. Hamza Youssef, who is the Health Secretary for the SNP. There are various people who I guess are waiting in the wings to come forward. The last thing the Scottish Conservatives tweeted about Nicola Sturgeon was 15 hours ago, and they'd made up an image of her, a rather sort of almost like a wanted poster, and it says Nicola Sturgeon is out of touch with the public on gender self-ID. Less than a third of Scottish public support Nicola Sturgeon's gender recognition, they said. A new poll has found she is out of touch with the Scottish public. No doubt she won't admit to that when she talks to the public in 10 minutes, but let's wait and see. We will go to that live at just about 11 o'clock. Your views as well at home. Thank you for keeping them coming. Helen says, calm down. Nicola Sturgeon is going, but the SNP remain. It's the whole SNP government, not just Nicola Sturgeon. I detest what the SNP stand for, but you might get a worse SNP leader.
I'm sure you will, because what does the SNP represent at the moment to any of us except Nicola Sturgeon?
That's right.
So we're all going to have to learn all over again what the SNP are all about.
Well, whoever that person is are going to have to very quickly come out of the starting blocks and tell us whether they want another referendum on devolution. That's going to be the main kind of defining factor for them going forward.
But surely they are redundant now. I mean, the reason that they've gone on for so long is they've taken all the Labour vote. So let's hope that maybe the Conservatives, if they can, and mainly Labour, step up step up and act for the Scottish people so the whole party can just go away.
You're right. Labour are going to have to. Labour have never won an election in this country without getting a significant number of seats in Scotland. At one time, they had over 40. So that's going to be their battleground here. Yeah. That could be the end of the SNP.
I also wonder, though, actually, as we recover the hangover from the lockdown policies, and we're seeing it everywhere, we're seeing it in our economy, we're seeing it in the health of our children, the health of our nation, we're seeing it in excess deaths of people who didn't access cancer treatments. You know, maybe her popularity, Tonya, is slightly tied to the fact that she was the most brutal when it came to more lockdowns, more restrictions. Maybe this is the public saying, actually, now we're seeing what you did to our economy. You're seeing what you did to our children.
Yeah, I think you're completely right. She was the most draconian without any sense of what it would do to the Scottish people, the Scottish economy, and in particular the Scottish youth. You are completely right there. And I'm hoping that this is the awakening, because we need to have an awakening across the world of how we behaved to each other and how the governments behaved to their people during lockdown. We are not in this crisis, we're not in a financial crisis globally because of the war in Ukraine or because of Brexit, as everybody likes to say. We are in this because of the way we reacted to lockdown. And I'm really hoping that the British public are waking up, and the public generally are waking up and saying, this was done to us.
Well, ironically,
it must never happen again.
Ironically, it should have been day 2 of the COVID inquiry today, Baroness Pallett's inquiry, which has now been delayed because there are too many redacted documents, apparently, and people who are giving evidence. I might be talking about this a little bit later in the show. People who are giving evidence are furious that there's so much secrecy still around a lot of the documents relating to the COVID inquiry. We don't know yet, Mike, what she's going to come out and say and what she will blame.
Well, I think we can kind of guess.
Who she can blame.
You know, she has a list of achievements and how I stood as the torchbearer for Scottish independence, and the people of Scotland wanted all that kind of stuff. But actually, Tony's just outlined the backdrop to it going back 3 or 4 years. But I genuinely believe that one interview, when she had to explain gender self-declaration, she was exposed as being somebody who's very good on, expounding fantastic theories. But then when asked factually, explain this one, because we all understand it, it's a very straightforward matter, she couldn't. No. So I think she lost incredible amounts of credibility in that one interview.
And also, I feel that journalists were quite fearful of her. Up until now, they were quite fearful. They wouldn't ask the questions because she was kind of dictatorish in the way that when you're out, she'd roll her eyes and say,
dismiss
move
them
on.
all as idiots.
Exactly. She loved doing that, dismissing people as idiots. But again, I think maybe now the journalists will journal as they're supposed to do and ask her some of the questions of her faulty reign, as it were. And one of the main things is that to sack 800 teachers in Scotland. Can you imagine that? That was one of her policies.
But it was then the fact that she couldn't stand by it and then said, OK, we'll reinstate them, but we're not going to give you any more money for it. You need to keep them.
And in fact, employ a few more, she actually said.
Let's see what you've been saying. You've been getting in touch at home on Twitter at GBNews and also email me gbviews@gbnews.uk. Alison has said, absolutely gutted about this. Nicola has been an incredible leader.
Wow.
And, that is the SNP. That's the MP for Glasgow, Scotland. But, let me just see who that was. OK, so that was Alison Thulis, who is the SNP MP for Glasgow Central. That's what she just said. Now, this one. This is from Stephen Kerr, MSP. This says, Nicola Sturgeon looked around at the mess of her own making. Gender reform, NHS crisis, strikes, council funding, A9 delays, education disasters, ferry and more, and she threw in the towel. Not a bad assessment, I think, of the situation.
I think her incompetency was enormous because Scotland are overrepresented in this country. They've got their own Holyrood. There's a Secretary of State for Scotland in Westminster. They've got representatives in Westminster. They've got about 3 different administrations. Now, with all of that and with the Barnett formula funding, she could have made Scotland a very competitive country within the Union. And she utterly failed. She went completely the other way and, in my view, destroyed Scotland in so many ways, culturally, politically and relationship-wise with England.
Absolutely. We're seeing more messages now popping up on social. So this is from the SNP Member of Parliament for Glasgow South, Stuart MacDonald. He's posted a picture of him with Nicola Sturgeon, and he said, Nicola Sturgeon is the finest public servant of the devolution age. Her public service, personal resilience and commitment to Scotland is unmatched, and she has served our party unlike anyone else. She will be an enormous loss as First Minister and SNP leader. Thank you, he says, with an exclamation mark, thanking them. More of your messages here. Margaret has said, best news ever. SNP have ruined Scotland. The arrogance of Nicola Sturgeon. All she wanted was independence. And to hell with everything else. Keep your messages coming to me. So we've got about 4 minutes, Tonya. What do you expect her to say in this? I think Mike's probably right. We'll have a list of her achievements. I wouldn't be surprised if she puts a shot across the bows of Rishi Sunak and Westminster, though.
Oh, God, yes. She absolutely will. But you know what I would really like? As soon as she comes on, I'd love someone to just come up and look at the decline of Scotland since 2014, since she took over. Yeah. Look at how many more drug addictions there are in Scotland. Look at the mess that is their NHS. Yeah. Look at what's happened to the education system in Scotland during this time. There should be someone ready to counter everything that she's... Because she's going to be full of bluster of how fabulous she was. Yeah. And that she's tired.
And no doubt she will also talk about the democracy, her frustration with the democratic process, not being allowed to have another referendum. She'll talk about the democratic process in that Westminster blocking her Gender Recognition Act. Yeah. I think there's going to be a lot of must along the way out.
But her views on democracy in Scotland are based on completely flawed figures, because she was taking percentages of only certain portions of the population. Do you see what I mean? And saying, you know, they won't let me do it, I've got 63% and 50%, if you see what I mean. Yeah. I think the main thing she'll say, and we've got an expert coming out to tell us, is her main theme will be, I was brought down by Westminster Tory austerity.
Yeah. Right, Tom Harwood has joined me in the studio. Tom, what do we know now that we didn't know from you 55 minutes ago?
Well, there's been a lot of reaction, obviously, to this news. There are lots of people trying to diagnose exactly why it is that Nicola Sturgeon has said that today she will likely be resigning, or at least this is what the reports are suggesting. We will hear from her in just a couple of minutes' time now. But clearly there is a multitude of factors at play here. Some people say that the public services that are being provided in Scotland are not good enough. There's been a long history of poor education results in Scotland, of lagging behind England when England has been improving its educational attainment. But similarly, there's been a lot of question of scandal within her party. There is this big question of what happened to £600,000 that was donated towards a cause for independence that seems to have disappeared from the SNP's books. Questions to answer there and a probe that has begun. And then also, of course, this issue of how the gender ID debate was handled, something that most Scots do not see as a priority. Most people across the United Kingdom do not put it in their top list of issues, no matter which side of the debate they fall on. And it seemed like Scottish politics became obsessed with it. That made Nicola Sturgeon look out of touch. It also exposed a certain inconsistency from her. She's always been seen to be a very competent media performer, and yet when she was asked on some of these questions surrounding gender issues, she has become more flustered, and perhaps some of the shine has come off her. We must not forget she's been in the post as First Minister for just over 8 years now, succeeding Alex Salmond without an election back in 2014. So to some extent there will be people in the SNP who think that really she's been in the job long enough. She is the longest serving SNP First Minister in Scotland.
We're just watching live pictures here, Tom. This is Bute House in Edinburgh. The Scottish flag there for our radio listeners. There are members of the press around a lectern. We're just waiting for Nicola Sturgeon to come out. Is she a punctual kind of person, Tom? I get the impression she probably is. Some politicians, do you think, might saunter in 20 minutes late? I'm guessing she's going to be there very soon.
She usually is punctual. Of course, we've seen time and time again with her COVID press conferences, which she continued right through beyond the time that UK government press conferences were taking place. Some people criticised her, of course, for this, using them to the ends of what some people described as party political broadcasts in the run-up to an election. But clearly, she is a fan of a press conference. She is very well used to standing behind a lectern like the one that we can see on our screens now. Although this is an occasion that she will not have been wanting to happen. No doubt there will have been behind-the-scenes pressure leading up to this moment, and it will be very interesting to watch her body language and how she speaks and how that is different from the times at which she seemed like she was in unassailable control of Scotland. Today, I think we will see a woman whose power has been dripping away, and it might well seem like a very different Nicola Sturgeon behind that podium.
What do you think she has to say, Tom, to damage limitation for the SNP today?
It's very, very difficult to see, because whenever we see a political party sort of go from one leader to the next, we always see some bloodletting. We always see the internals of a party that they may well have want to keep behind closed doors for a very long time. It's expected there will be a contested leadership election within the SNP, and that may well not be a good moment for the party. You will see the most extreme ends of the party try and campaign, try and push it down a more radical path. You will see leadership candidates bow not to the electorate of Scotland, but to the selectorate of the SNP. And whether we saw it with the Labour Party back in 2015 when they elected Jeremy Corbyn, or the Conservative Party just last year in the election of Liz Truss, very often these parties get accused of talking to themselves rather than the country, and that can have negative effects on the poll rating.
That's true. Won't you just blame the English, Tom, in the end? Won't you say it was all the English's fault? Wasn't anything to do with me?
That is the default position of Nicola Sturgeon. That is what we have seen Nicola Sturgeon do throughout her political career. She joined the party at the age of 16. She joined the Youth Party's national executive at the age of 17. She was the youngest political candidate in Scotland in the 1992 general election, and she became an SNP MSP in 1999 when still in her 20s. She was in the first ever shadow cabinet in the Scottish Parliament. She was seen to be very close to Alex Salmond at that time. She has been, throughout her entire adult life, imbued in this party and reached the point of First Minister. This has been her entire life, and everything has come up to this point today.
There was
but
some
clearly...
footage leaked recently, wasn't there, Tom, of Alex Salmond talking at an after-dinner speech where he was really criticising Nicola Sturgeon for not being able to say what a woman was. What's their relationship like now?
Well, of course, the big fractious point between Nicola Sturgeon and Alex Salmond came a couple of years ago with those sexual harassment allegations against Alex Salmond, and the bitter row that we saw in those two individuals appearing before a committee of the Scottish Parliament. Now, that relationship has been very, very bitter. Alex Salmond formed his own party, the Alba Party, in opposition to the SNP. It stood against SNP candidates in the last Scottish elections. Although it didn't win any seats, there was clearly a lot of bitterness between Alex Salmond and Nicola Sturgeon. And now Alex Salmond is going around and saying that Nicola Sturgeon's obsession with gender reform has damaged the cause for Scottish independence. Just last week, we saw a poll showing support for independence has dipped below 40%. That's a 10-point drop from some of the polls that we saw during the height of the pandemic. No doubt that will have played into this decision today as well. We're seeing some divisions within the SNP, a party that is usually so united, that usually, at least on the surface, presents such an impenetrable front. It doesn't like dissent within its ranks. It doesn't like the sort of normal discussion that we might see in Westminster, where there are rebels and whatever else within the party. That had been the point up until this sort of gender war began within the party, and you started to see for the first time some of those individuals breaking away from the party line, most notably perhaps Joanna Cherry, who started speaking out against these reforms from Nicola Sturgeon. And so some of those cracks began to be seen within a party that had seemed so uniform for so long, and no doubt those cracks within the party have been bubbling up. Of course, we saw the resignation of Ian Blackford as the leader in Westminster only a few weeks ago, and similarly now we are seeing the likely resignation of Nicola Sturgeon at Bute House in Edinburgh today. Perhaps this is all part of the same sort of tension that is coming to bear across the party.
Alex Salmond said, I think it was only about a week ago, the quote was, she's been reduced, Nicola Sturgeon, to the stumbling incoherence when people are starting to laugh at you. You should realise you're trying to defend the indefensible, is what he was saying. Is that what happened, Mike Parry? Was it that it tipped over from her being somebody that was incredibly Marmite? I mean, a lot of our viewers here getting in touch and saying, you know, how happy they are about her resignation today. But something changed in the last couple of weeks and she became a bit of a joke.
Well, like a lot of people who are right at the top, sometimes extreme confidence tips over into blatant arrogance.
Yeah.
And that arrogance then, I think the Scottish people were starting to think, she's taking me for a fool now. You know, a strong leader, confident, delivering policies, got the country behind them, fine. But then starting to try and interpret your own policies against common sense, and the Scottish people they've got a lot of common sense. And also, I think there's a great business culture in Scotland. Whenever I go there, I'm always impressed by the way good things work, you know, hotels and transport and that. And they were getting hammered, weren't they, by her policies, and the economy was getting hammered, and that's why I think it's worked against her. But just to answer your question, I think in the last few times I've seen her publicly and the stumbling interview trying to explain the transgender, she came over as I know better than you. Even if I can't explain it properly, you have to take my word for it. And I think that's what got to people.
But I think she's got away with that for a long time. I do think, and I'm just going to put my neck on the line here, that this 600,000 that's missing will have a lot to do with what's going on today.
Well, we don't know.
I don't think it's just the gender thing.
We don't know, but it does feel like something possibly has happened to make this statement today. It feels like more of a sort of a crisis decision, doesn't it? Because, yes, she's been having a hard time, but, you know, she's always had a hard time. She's always been
But she's enjoyed it.
And she's enjoyed it, and she's thrived on that
Absolutely.
kind of,
World's against Scotland, but don't worry, I'm standing up for you.
That's right. She doesn't mind being the Braveheart.
Yes,
okay? That's what she's been for many years, how she's cast herself.
Exactly.
A few people are messaging the show to say that they think she's going to come out and do a Meghan Markle and play the victim, and saying that, you know, none of this is her fault.
No, it's all down to England.
This is all down to England. This is all down to Westminster.
I should think old Boris is raising a glass or two at the moment, wouldn't you? You know, because she was a really particular thorn in Boris Johnson's side, wasn't she?
I would have thought so. Our viewers, what have you been saying? Richard said, best news to hit the country since Brexit. I couldn't be happier to see the back of her. Kathleen, it's a great day here in Scotland if we get rid of Sturgeon. The whole SNP party is rubbish. But let's get on with it and get rid of Holyrood too, a great waste of money. David, great news from a delighted viewer from Scotland. This divisive person has finally fallen. She never spoke for the majority. This is a great day. Not many people, Tonya, getting in touch to say that they're sad to see the back of her. The only tweets we managed to find so far are from her colleagues in the SNP.
That is amazing.
It really is amazing.
You know, the general populace of Scotland have not rushed forward, and in her defence, if she's done so much for the country, she's telling us all she has.
But because it's all coming to light now. You know, what happened during the COVID years, and she looked like she was being strong, but she wasn't. She was just being a kind of almost Chinese dictator in the way that she was running the country. She was, because she's so bullshit, she really is. And we had such weak leadership in Westminster. They were following in her trails. And the main one for me was the masking of children in schools. I will never forgive her for that. That was just done on a whim for her, and then again on a whim by Westminster, and our children were made to suffer because of that. So there's so much I think is going to come out about
Sturgeon
how bad
is making her way to the lectern, dressed in red.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming along. I'm sorry to break into your half-term break. Being First Minister of Scotland is, in my admittedly biased opinion, the very best job in the world. It is a privilege beyond measure, one that has sustained and inspired me in good times and through the toughest hours of my toughest days. I am proud to stand here as the first female and longest serving incumbent of this office. And I'm very proud of what has been achieved in the years I've been in Bute House. However, since my very first moments in the job, I have believed that part of serving well would be to know, almost instinctively, when the time is right to make way for someone else. And when that time came, to have the courage to do so, even if to many across the country and in my party, it might feel too soon. In my head and in my heart, I know that time is now, that it is right for me, for my party and for the country. And so today I am announcing my intention to step down as First Minister and leader of my party. I have asked the National Secretary of the SNP to begin the process of electing a new party leader, and I will remain in office until my successor is elected. I know there will be some across the country who feel upset by this decision and by the fact I am taking it now. Of course, for balance, there will be others who will, how should I put this, cope with the news just fine. Such is the beauty of democracy. But to those who do feel shocked, disappointed, perhaps even a bit angry with me, please know that while hard, and be in no doubt, this is really hard for me, my decision comes from a place of duty and of love. Tough love, perhaps, but love nevertheless for my party and above all for the country. Let me set out as best as I can my reasons. First, though I know it will be tempting to see it as such, this decision is not a reaction to short-term pressures. Of course, there are difficult issues confronting the government just now, but when is that ever not the case? I have spent almost 3 decades in frontline politics, a decade and a half on the top or second top rung of government. When it comes to navigating choppy waters, resolving seemingly intractable issues, or soldiering on when walking away would be the simpler option, I have plenty of experience to draw on. So if this was just a question of my ability or my resilience to get through the latest period of pressure, I wouldn't be standing here today, but it's not. This decision comes from a deeper and longer term assessment. I know it might seem sudden, but I have been wrestling with it, albeit with oscillating levels of intensity for some weeks. Essentially, I've been trying to answer 2 questions. Is carrying on right for me? And more importantly, is me carrying on right for the country, for my party, and for the independence cause I have devoted my life to? I understand why some will automatically answer yes to that second question. But in truth, I have been having to work harder in recent times to convince myself that the answer to either of them, when examined deeply, is yes. And I've reached the difficult conclusion that it's not. The questions are inextricably linked, but let me First Minister for over 8 years, and I was Deputy First Minister for the best part of 8 years before that. These jobs are a privilege, but they are also rightly hard, and especially in the case of First Minister, relentlessly so. Now, to be clear, I'm not expecting violins here, but I am a human being as well as a politician. When I entered government in 2007, my niece and youngest nephew were babies, just months old. As I stepped down, they are about to celebrate their 17th birthdays. Now that I think about it, that's exactly the age to be horrified at the thought of your auntie suddenly having more time for you. My point is this: giving absolutely everything of yourself to this job is the only way to do it. The country deserves nothing less. But in truth, that can only be done by anyone for so long. For me, it is now in danger of becoming too long. A First Minister is never off duty, particularly in this day and age. There is virtually no privacy. Even ordinary stuff that most people take for granted, like going for a coffee with friends or for a walk on your own, becomes very difficult. And the nature and form of modern political discourse means that there is a much greater intensity, dare I say it, brutality, to life as a politician than in years gone by. All in all, and actually for a long time without it being apparent, it takes its toll on you and on those around you. And if that is true in the best of times, it has been more so in recent years. Leading this country through the COVID pandemic is by far the toughest thing I've done. It may well be the toughest thing I ever did. No stretch of the imagination was my job the hardest in the country during that time. But the weight of responsibility was immense. And it's only very recently, I think, that I've started to comprehend, let alone process, the physical and mental impact of it on me. So what I'm really saying on for another few months, then the answer is yes, of course I can. But if the question is, can I give this job everything it demands and deserves for another year, let alone for the remainder of this parliamentary term, give it every ounce of energy that it needs in the way that I have strived to do every day for the past 8 years? The answer, honestly, is different. And as that is my conclusion, hard though it has been for me to reach it, then given the nature and scale of the challenges the country faces, I have a duty to say so now. I feel that duty first and foremost to our country to ensure that it has the energy of leadership that it needs, not just today, but through the years that remain of this parliamentary term. And right now, in a very particular sense, I feel that duty to my party too. We are at a critical moment. The blocking of a referendum as the accepted constitutional route to independence is a democratic outrage. But it puts the onus on us to decide how Scottish democracy will be protected and to ensure that the will of the Scottish people prevails. My preference of using the next Westminster election as a de facto referendum is well known. I've never pretended it is perfect, no second best option ever is, nor that there are no alternatives. That is why I've always been clear that the decision must be taken by the SNP collectively, not by me alone. But I know my party well enough to understand that my view as leader would carry enormous, probably decisive weight when our conference meets next month. And I cannot, in good conscience, ask the party to choose an option based on my judgment, whilst not being convinced that I would be there as a leader to see it through. By making my decision clear now, I free the SNP to choose the path it believes to be the right one, without worrying about the perceived implications for my leadership, and in the knowledge that a new leader will steer us, I believe, successfully on that path. Now, there are two further reflections that have weighed in my decision. These, I suppose, are more about our political culture and the nature and impact of the dominance and longevity that come from success in politics. And the first, I hope my party will take heart from. One of the difficulties in coming to terms with this decision is that I am confident that I can and would lead the SNP to further electoral success. We remain by far the most trusted party in Scotland. And while for every person in Scotland who loves me, there is another who, let's say, might not be quite so enthusiastic, we are firmly on course to win the next election, while our opponents remain adrift. But the longer any leader is in office, the more opinions about them become fixed and very hard to change. And that matters. Individual polls come and go, but I am firmly of the view that there is now majority support for independence in Scotland. But that support needs to be solidified, and it needs to grow further if our independent Scotland is to have the best possible foundation. To achieve that, we must reach across the divide in Scottish politics. And my judgment now is that a new leader will be better able to do this. Someone about whom the mind of almost everyone in the country is not already made up, for better or worse. someone who is not subject to quite the same polarised opinions, fair or unfair, as I now am. The good news, as the country will now get to see more clearly perhaps, is that the SNP is full of talented individuals more than up to that task. My second reflection is related. I feel more and more each day now that the fixed opinions people increasingly have about me, as I say, some fair, others little more than caricature, are being used as barriers to reasoned debate in our country. Statements and decisions that should not be controversial at all quickly become so. Issues that are controversial end up almost irrationally so. Too often I see issues presented and, as a result, viewed not on their own merits, but through the prism of what I think and what people think about me. I've always been of the belief that no one individual should be dominant in any system for too long. But while it's easy to hold that view in the abstract, it is much harder to live by it. With this decision, I am trying to do so. Indeed, if all parties were to take this opportunity to depolarise public debate just a bit, to focus more on issues than on personalities, and to reset the tone and the tenor of our discourse, then this decision, right for me and I believe for my party and the country, might also prove to be good for our politics. I certainly live in hope. Now, a couple of final points before I take a few questions. While I am stepping down from leadership, I am not leaving politics. There are many issues I care deeply about and hope to champion in future. One of these is the Promise, the national mission so close to my heart to improve the life chances of care experienced young people and ensure they grow up nurtured and loved. My commitment to these young people will be lifelong. And obviously, there is independence. Winning independence is the cause I have dedicated a lifetime to. It is a cause I believe in with every fibre of my being. And it is a cause I am convinced is being won. I intend to be there as it is won every step of the way. Yesterday morning, I attended the funeral of a very, very dear friend and long-standing independence activist, a wonderful man by the name of Alan Angus. It was actually during that funeral service that I went from being 99% certain about this decision to 100% certain, though I know Alan would not be at all happy to have played any part in my departure, so I'm sorry, Alan. But his funeral reminded me that the cause of independence is so much bigger than any one individual, that all of us who believe in it contribute in different ways at different stages of our lives. Since I was 16, I have contributed as an activist, a campaigner, and a leader. And so now, as we look to what I firmly believe is the final stage in Scotland's journey to independence, albeit a hard one, I hope to use all the experience and perspective I've gathered over these years to help get us there. Lastly, there will be time in the days to come for me and others to reflect on what has been achieved during my time as First Minister. I'm pretty certain there will be plenty of commentary on my mistakes as well. I will have more to say before I demit office, but allow me some brief reflections now. Scotland is a changed country since 2014, and in so many ways, it is changed for the better. Young people from deprived backgrounds have never had a better chance of going to university than now. Our investment to double early learning and childcare is transforming opportunities for the youngest children. It's also enabling more women to return to work. The baby box is enshrining our aspiration that every child should have the best start in life. Scotland is fairer today than it was in 2014. We have a more progressive approach to taxation and a new social security system with the Scottish Child Payment at its heart. As the Institute for Fiscal Studies confirmed last week, the poorest families with children in Scotland are now £2,000 better off as a result of our policies. For many in this cost of living crisis, that will be the difference between food on the table and a warm home or not. There are stronger protections for victims of domestic abuse, and Parliament will soon consider legislation to improve access to justice for victims of rape and sexual offences. I will be the strongest possible advocate for these reforms from the backbenches. We've also shown over these past few years what can be done with the full powers of a nation, creating institutions that are part of the transition to becoming independent. New tax and social security agencies, a network of trade hubs across the world, and a state-owned investment bank ready to help the country reap the industrial benefits of our vast renewable resources. There is so much that I am proud of, but there is always so much more to be done. I look forward to watching with pride as my successor picks up the baton. There will also be time in the days to come for me to say thank you to a very, very long list of people without whom I would not have lasted a single day in this job, let alone 8 years. I won't do so today. I might inadvertently forget someone, or perhaps more likely start to cry. But there are a couple of exceptions. Firstly, my husband and family. Few people understand the price families of politicians pay for the jobs we choose to do. Mine have been my rock throughout. And of course, the SNP. Since I was 16 years old, you have been my extended family. Thank you for the honour of being your leader. And it seems to me that 8 emphatic election victories in 8 years ain't a bad record together. Finally, and above all, the people of this beautiful, talented, diverse, at times disputatious, but always wonderful country. We faced the toughest of times together. I did everything I could to guide us through that time, often from my very familiar podium in St Andrew's House. And in return, I was sustained through that period by a wave of support from you that I will remember and value for the rest of my life. So to the people of Scotland, to all of the people of Scotland, whether you voted for me or not, please know that being your First Minister has been the privilege of my life. Nothing, absolutely nothing I do in future will ever come anywhere close. Thank you from the very bottom of my heart. If you forgive me, I'm not going to do my usual and go round absolutely every journalist in the room. There will be time over the next few weeks, I'm sure, for you all to ask me questions, but I'll take a few questions for now, and I'll start with Glenn Campbell from the BBC.
First Minister, if you can't lead Scotland to independence, First Minister, if you can't lead Scotland to independence, who, if anyone, can? And what is the timetable now for your replacement? And on a slightly lighter note, do you now owe Douglas Ross £100 as a result of a bet?
I think it was 50, so if he's already inflated it to 100, we may have words there. I will let Mr Ross have the bet. My party will keep winning the elections. On your other questions, on the timetable, that's a matter for the SNP National Executive Committee. I'm sure it will set out the timetable for the election of a new SNP leader over the coming days, and I will demit office when my successor has been elected, and then, obviously subject to the will of Parliament, elected as the new First Minister. And this is a question that no matter how many times you ask it of me over the next few weeks, no matter how many inventive ways you find of asking it, I am not going to say who my preference will be to succeed me. What I do know is that the SNP is awash with talented individuals. One of the things that I've often reflected on is that when a political party, any political party in any country, has very dominant individuals, others, through no fault of the dominant individual, I should say, and not sometimes for the want of trying, often others become a bit eclipsed there. So what I'm looking forward to, and I think the country will enjoy over these next few weeks, is seeing that talent and seeing the array of talent. I believe I have led this country closer to independence. I believe we are in the final phase of that journey. I think it will be hard because now we have the dual challenge, the one we always had of convincing a majority, a solid, sustainable majority, of the merits of independence, but also, secondly, a challenge that is new of finding, in the face of Westminster anti-democratic opposition, that democratic route to allowing the will of the Scottish people to be expressed. And I believe that my successor, I firmly believe that my successor, whoever he or she may be, will lead Scotland to independence. And I'll be there cheering him or her on every single step of the way. Conor Gillis from Sky.
Thanks, First Minister. You say that you've been wrestling with this decision for a number of weeks now, and it's not in reaction to some issues over the last couple of weeks, couple of months. Do you believe, though, that the issues, and particularly the row around transgender prisoners, was the straw that broke the camel's back here? And second of all, has it been a failure of your leadership not to have delivered independence, since that was your sort of founding mission back in 2014?
I'll leave other people to be the judge of my leadership. It's probably a bit invidious beyond saying what I'm proud of, and taking this country ever closer to independence is one of those things. It's a bit invidious for me to cast that judgment. No, that issue wasn't the final straw. Look, I'm long enough in the tooth. I've been in politics, as all of you know, for a long, long time. I'm not going to stand here and insult your intelligence and say that I live in a world that is divorced from the realities of what is going on around me. But it's not the case that this decision is because of short-term issues. I've faced more short-term issues from time to time over my years in politics than I care to remember. And if it was just that, I wouldn't be standing here today. What I would say, though, is this, and I did allude to this in my remarks. I suppose when I look at some of the issues that are being hotly debated in Scotland right now, one of the things that I do regret, I suppose, is not being able to bring a more rational approach to these debates. And I think that goes back to some of what I said earlier. These debates, some of them, one in particular right now, is obviously controversial in its own right. But I think layered on to the top of that, there has been people's views about me, about independence, and suddenly debates that should be rational and that we should be capable as a country of having rationally become something very different. I will always be a voice for inclusion, for quality, equality, for human rights and dignity. I have been, am, and will always be a feminist. I will fight for women's rights, and I will stand up against threats to women's rights every day that I have breath in my body. But I'll also stand up for any stigmatised, discriminated against, marginalised and vulnerable group in society. And I believe, and call me, an optimist. Not many people call me an optimist, but I am at heart an optimist. I believe these things can and must, in any progressive, liberal, inclusive society, find ways of coexisting. And whatever role I play in politics in the future, I will always seek to do everything I can to turn that into a reality. Colin Mackay.
How have you gone from having plenty in the tank 3 weeks ago to an empty tank today? What is it that's changed over the last few weeks? You've mentioned some things. The only thing you didn't mention is the police inquiry into the party's finances.
Look, these things are not the reason I'm standing here today. These are not factors, nor will my decision today affect these things, and all of these things will take their course. I said something in my remarks that I appreciate will divide opinion in Scotland. I'm a human being, and every human being every day wrestles with a whole load of conflicting emotions. And over the last number of weeks, probably since around the turn of the year, I've been struggling with just that. I get up in the morning and I tell myself, and usually I convince myself that I've got what it takes to keep going and keep going and keep going. But then I realise that's maybe not as true. And you go through a process of just deciding where it is and that decision you're going to fall. And that's the decision I've come to today. I could go on for another few months. I don't know, 6 months, a year maybe. But I know that as time passed, I would have less and less energy to give to the job. And I can't do the job on anything other than a 100% basis. The country deserves nothing less than that. So that's the judgment I've come to. If that's my feeling that I'm going to get in a relatively short space of time to where I am today, then I owe it to the country to see it now, so that that new leadership can be in place. And as I said, in relation to my party, I don't want to stand at a special conference, a month or so from now, and ask my party to take my judgment, opt for a path, knowing that I have doubts about my ability to see it through as leader. This is a better thing to do today for me, for my party, and I believe for the country too. James Cook.
First Minister, I think it's fair to say that the NHS is in a really serious situation. The attainment gap between rich and poor pupils, which you'd said was one of your core missions as First Minister, remains pretty wide. And despite what you're saying today, polls suggest that you've got nowhere near creating a sustained majority for independence. Do you have regrets about one or any of those issues?
Oh, again, James, I'm a human being. I don't know if you've got regrets about things in your life. Of course, I've got regrets about all sorts of things in my life. And as I reflect on my time as First Minister, there'll be things I am hugely proud of and things that I regret. And if I had my time again, I might do differently. And forgive me, there'll be plenty of time for me to do that. There'll, I'm sure, be plenty of time for you to do that. And I'm sure you will. So, yeah, but I'm proud of my time as First Minister. But I'm also proud that I know when it's time to move on and to pass on to someone else. The country, the cause I believe in, my party, everything is bigger than any politician, no matter who they are and no matter how dominant they've been for no matter how much time. Politicians come and go all the time. The country is what matters, and the future of the country is what matters. I'm proud of the part I have played and hope to continue to play in a different capacity in building the future of this country. But I think in terms of leadership, it's time for someone else. I think the easier sometimes thing to do, and the thing that traditionally politicians tend to do, is just cling on and on and on and on and on until everybody is sort of pushing for you to go. It's harder because there's always reasons not to. Yeah, if I stay a bit longer, I can do this. If I stay a bit longer, something might happen. It's always easier to find the reasons not to make a decision. I think it's better to make the decision when you know in your heart that it's the right one for you and for your country. I'm not sure I want to say this sentence, actually. I will be 53 this year. I entered Parliament, when I was, 29. I've been in government since I was 37. I have literally done this in one capacity or another for all of my life. I've been Nicola Sturgeon, the politician, for all of my life. It's been a privilege. I have done things, met people, gone places, had experiences I would never have done. I have a depth of gratitude to the party that I lead, to the country that I serve, that I can never find the words to express. But having reached this stage in my life, maybe I want to spend a bit of time on Nicola Sturgeon, the person, the human being, and contribute differently. And does that sound in some ways selfish? I hope it doesn't, because I have given and will, in whatever way I can, continue to give everything I can in service to this country. But I need for me, and I think it's right for the country to do that in a different way in future. And that is what I'm seeking to do. And the more I talk, the more convinced I am that this is the right decision for me. I'll take Louise Scott from ITV. I'm going to end up doing what I said I wouldn't do. I'm not going to do that. Louise.
First Minister, we've heard rumblings of divisions within the party in recent weeks, particularly around certain issues. Ultimately, did you lose trust in your leadership from certain key members of your party?
I think you'd have to ask individuals to give their views on my leadership. I think any objective analysis would suggest that that's not true. I enjoy but I, even in times that would be described, have been described by most of you as tough, I enjoy approval ratings after 8 years in government that most leaders would give their right arm for. So, yes, of course, the longer any leader is in office, the more people will find things to disagree with you on, because nobody agrees with any other person 100%. And that concept of that whole idea of longevity in politics, the longer you lead, the more you will find issues that people find it hard to agree with you on. But, you know, I believe I could, if it was just about, can I lead this country forward, certainly the party to electoral success, the answer is yes. But it is much deeper than that, which is what I've been trying to give a sense of today. Who will we have next? Kieran Jenkins.
If you are just joining us, you are listening to Scotland's First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, who has resigned rather dramatically. She gave a speech there in which she's saying actually she intends to resign, which means she will stay in the post whilst the SNP decide the political process and the timing of which, the schedule of which will lead to her successor. Tom Harwood is with me. Also, Mike Parry and Tonya Buxton are still in the studio to assess this. Tom, it was a sort of softer Nicola Sturgeon than we're used to seeing. She was trying very hard to appeal to, perhaps. She did a bit of a Jacinda Ardern. She was talking about the pressures of this job, the fact that she can't go for a coffee with her friends. She talks about the brutality around society and social feelings towards her. She didn't, I don't think, throw as many people under the bus as I thought she might do as she went out of the door. That was a little bit surprising. And she kind of made this... she drew this conclusion that actually her character has been too big for some of the issues she wants to get discussed, to be discussed rationally. She kept using that word. What did you make of it all?
Yeah, it is interesting because that is actually something that we're going to see a lot of in the coming weeks that this contest will no doubt take place in. Nicola Sturgeon has been such a huge figure within the SNP that actually there is no sort of immediate, obvious successor as there was when she became the First Minister. She was the only candidate to succeed Alex Salmond. And now there are so many different names that are being thrown in the mix in terms of who might succeed her. And not many people know what these people stand for. So we're going to see some voices and some names that perhaps not many people across the country are particularly familiar with, going after this enormous job to lead one of the big devolved authorities in this country. But it is notable how Nicola Sturgeon spoke about being, for her entire life, since she was the age of 16, Nicola Sturgeon, the politician. Yeah. And now, at the age of 53, she wants to become Nicola Sturgeon, the person, the human being. She spoke about wanting to spend more time with her nieces and nephews, about thinking about the independence movement in the round, sitting at the funeral of a close friend yesterday, thinking that actually this is something bigger than herself. And no doubt that has played into this decision as well. But I think it would be remiss to talk about the issues that Scotland faces, the policy failures that clearly have taken place. Sturgeon wanted to sort of skirt over those in the Q&A session there. She wanted to say this isn't about any particular issue. Every government always has challenges. But I think it would be remiss to ignore those particular challenges her government is facing. The poll ratings for independence that have been sliding in recent weeks, clearly these, along with the divisions in her party, have played into this decision.
She said, actually, what we were discussing, which is that she said she's used to navigating these choppy waters when she was asked, is this a short-term decision because of what you're facing in the moment? And she said, no, I have plenty of experience in negotiating those choppy waters, which is what we were saying just before she spoke. She didn't make any reference. She didn't allude to any particular crisis, though, did she, that might be looming in the background. She was very grateful for the support of her family. She talked about a long-term assessment that she has been considering this. She said, I've been wrestling with it, with these two questions. Is carrying on right for me? Is carrying on right for my party and therefore the independence cause? And it's been a deep examination. There was no massive revelations in there, Tom, really, was there?
No, I don't think we should expect any big revelations today. No doubt more will come out in the coming days and weeks as people around Nicola Sturgeon, perhaps people close to her inner circle, will start to speak, and maybe some arguments will be had, as no doubt always takes place in these sort of leadership contests. There will be some more bitterness going forward. But I think just one thing to note.
Go on, Tom.
Is the particular position this now leaves the Labour Party in Scotland, who since 2015 have been completely wiped out, have not been seen as a credible, serious force, have been not the second largest party even, but the third largest party in Scotland. This now gives the Labour Party an enormous opportunity in Scotland to regain those seats they lost back in 2015. And that makes potentially Keir Starmer's path to number 10 a lot easier than it was yesterday.
OK. Thank you, Tom. I'm dying to know what Tony Buxton and Mike Parry make of this, but I think we're going to go to a guest now. We're going up to Scotland, I believe, in just a moment. There we go. There's our correspondent. Hello, Tony. Tony Maguire there, GB News correspondent up in Scotland. What's the reaction there?
Hello. Well, I'm surrounded by probably about 200 people who came outside today to watch the resignation speech on their phones. We heard some quite admittances there from Nicola Sturgeon about things that she wished she could have done better. She cited that two real main reasons for her leaving were obviously at the funeral of SNP campaigner Alan Livingston, where she went from 99 to 100% sure, and obviously, as you've just spoken about there with Tom, the general change in the landscape of politics and how her almost cult of personality has really affected the way that she can navigate around policy here.
OK, all right. Thank you very much. That was Tony Maguire there outside Butte House in Edinburgh. As I said, I'm dying to know what my panel make of that. Mike Parry, let me come to you. We were sat here analysing what Nicola Sturgeon might say on her way out. How did it compare to what we concluded might be on?
I said before she actually announced her resignation, I thought she was going to claim that it was all the nasty people down at Westminster, you know, Tory austerity, and she didn't come to that. And I appreciate what Tom's just said, because we're all in the business where we know that this Sunday she might give a number of interviews to newspapers or something like that, and you know, more will emerge. She could well be already putting together in her head the reasons why she has given it up, you know what I mean? Because
do a Liz Truss and do a 4,000-word article.
Yeah, because what happened. But I don't have much sympathy for politicians who 1 minute are bold and brash and they're striding forward and they want the respect of everybody as a leader, who the next minute, when something's gone wrong, because something clearly has gone wrong, are saying, I'm just a human being. I don't want violence, but I'm a human being. Her sheer arrogance came out in the third or fourth paragraph when she said that, you know, my resignation, I have to say, some might feel it's come too soon.
I know when she said that, I thought, not the GBNews viewers go, not if my inbox is anything to go by.
I thought that's a nice humble touch, you know, as you move on to the next part of your political career.
It also tells us who politicians like Nicola Sturgeon are surrounded by, doesn't it? It tells you the echo chamber that they live in.
Yes, it does, absolutely.
Nobody said to her, you know what, a lot of people are going to be quite happy today.
Just before she came out to the podium today, maybe somebody said, no, you're sure you want to do this, Nicola? Well, some may feel it's too soon, but then she asked for another pat on the back by saying, but I've had the courage to do it. You know, I mean, she wants applauding for that as well.
I just want to let our viewers and listeners know, because I know it's a story which we are all following as closely as we can. Lancashire Police will be holding a press conference amid the ongoing search for Nicola Bulley. Quite soon, I believe, GB News will bring you any developments. We will take that press conference as and when it happens. We're talking, of course, if you're just joining us, about the shock resignation of Nicola Sturgeon as the leader of the SNP and Scotland's First Lady. Tonya, let me come to you. I saw you furiously scribbling down notes when Nicola Sturgeon was talking there. She made a great deal about how much she will devote her life now. She's not leaving politics. She wants to make a commitment to children and young people.
Why didn't she do that when she was in office?
Yes,
Why didn't she actually put them forward? And all these things that she said she was a success of, she's fibbing. I mean, the reality will come out when you have to look at what she's done for young people in Scotland, what she's done for the education of Scotland, what she's done to the NHS of Scotland. All of it, Scotland is worse off now than it was before she was in. And so all of this kind of... I mean, I'm sorry, I feel like I'm bashing down on a woman, but it really was a horrible sob story from a woman who had no sympathy, no empathy and no care while she was leading. You know, she hurt a lot of people. A lot of people suffered in Scotland, especially during lockdown, especially for the mental health of the people living there. She had no empathy, and now she's saying, oh, I don't want violins, but I'm only human. I mean, I found it a little bit nauseating.
And the other point she made was, she said, I believe there's a majority support for independence in Scotland. That's a barefaced inaccuracy, isn't it? Don't we know that all the latest polls have shown that's not? And that could be one of the reasons why she's had to stand down.
But she did go back. She said the Westminster anti-democratic decision not to let her have another referendum. Now, let's just in case, we are a democratic country. Democracy was declared when they had the referendum.
Yes.
So once in a generation election, and Scotland did not want to be independent. End of. I just don't understand why the SNP is still functioning.
She actually called that a democratic outrage, the blocking of a new referendum. Democratic outrage. But it's not, as you quite rightly said, it was once in a generation.
Right, we're going to go to another guest now. I'm going to speak to a political commentator and managing director of PR firm Penta, Andy Williams. Good morning, Andy. Just your reaction to the news this morning, and how do you think Nicola Sturgeon handled that resignation speech?
Yeah, well, obviously a huge surprise, and Nicola Sturgeon has been the dominant figure in Scottish politics for pretty much the last decade, and one of the dominant figures in UK politics for a very long time. So I think it marks a sea change both in UK politics, in the independence debate. She acknowledged that she'd been a divisive figure, and I think that's for sure. I suppose I'd make 2 points. One, as your guests have pointed out, is that she's actually not made a great deal of progress for the independence cause. The latest polling shows that 58% of people, I think, are against independence. In fact, many people say that in Scotland say that the Scottish government's performance makes them less likely to vote in favour of independence.
Andy, I'm so sorry to interrupt you. I'm so sorry. It was very brief. We do believe that the Nicola Bulley press conference is happening now. I'm very sorry, Andy. Let's go live to that.
I want to thank you for making the effort to come here this morning so that we could give you an update on our investigation to find Nicola. She and her family remain foremost in our thoughts and our priorities in the investigation. Some of what Becky and I will say today has already been made public and has been widely reported, but I am acutely aware that there continues to be extensive media interest, commentary, speculation and indeed some criticism of our police investigation. Therefore, to try and address some of that, we will take you through in some detail, more than would normally be the case with an investigation, what exactly we have done over the last 19 days and continue to do. To remind us, Nicola went missing on the morning of Friday the 27th of January, and since that time we have done an unprecedented amount of work on the investigation to try and find her. The sole focus of that work is to find Nicola, to bring her home to her family and give them the answers they so desperately need. The investigation has involved a dedicated team of more than 40 detectives. They've been looking through hundreds of hours of CCTV, dashcam footage, speaking to numerous witnesses, carrying out digital inquiries and examining literally hundreds of pieces of information submitted by the public. And I would like to thank the public for all of their assistance throughout this investigation. There are also dozens of other officers and staff who have helped in the investigation, searchers and reassurance for the local community in St Michael's. We've involved a range of specialists, both locally, regionally and nationally. The investigation has not wanted at any stage for experts who are the best in their field available to law enforcement in the UK. I would emphasise that it remains the case there is no evidence to indicate a criminal aspect or third-party involvement in Nicola's disappearance. However, the officers involved in the investigation are the same experienced specialists and many senior officers who are concerned with the investigation of the most serious and complex crimes. That is the importance and focus we have given to the investigation to find Nicola. To give you some figures to back up some of what I've described, we have visited more than 300 premises, spoken to almost 300 people and received around about 1,500 pieces of information into the inquiry. In terms of the physical searches, both water-based and on land, we've used specialist resources from both police a range of other agencies, and I'm grateful to those other agencies who've supported us. And in police assets, that's included the North West Underwater Search Unit, police horses, dogs, and the police helicopter. We continue to search extensively the River Wire and surrounding area downstream and out into the sea towards the estuary. We've consulted with national experts in their field, including environmental and tidal experts, and we're carrying out have carried out an extensive land search surrounding the river, including some properties in the area. Slides have been made available for you to see, which show in some detail exactly where we've searched, but it's important to say that our activity has at every stage been directed by expert trained police search advisors, who we term pulsers, and they've been following a nationally recognised doctrine around search strategy, which will be followed by any expert police search advisor in UK policing. The lead police search advisor is here, and at the conclusion of the press conference, if you have any specific questions on a one-to-one basis with that officer, so it remains the case at the present time that there is no evidence in all the exhaustive inquiries we've made that suggests any crime has been committed or that there is any third-party involvement in Nicola's disappearance. It is important for me to stress that the investigation continues and going, and we are meticulously reviewing all information gathered from members of Nicola's family, the public, CCTV, dashcam, and other digital devices, to name just a few. We're also continuing.
So you were listening there to Peter Lawson, the Assistant Chief Constable from Lancashire Police, obviously conducting a press conference there. The first press conference since Nicola Bulley went missing in Lancashire on Friday, the 27th of January. The connection wasn't great, I'm afraid, so we've come out of that. Mike Parry, I know you've been following this story closely. I was really hoping we were going to get some significant leads, at least from this press conference.
I can't stand it. They've thrown a press conference to give us no evidence to indicate third-party criminal involvement. It's a missing persons inquiry. How can you possibly rule that out? I have no faith whatsoever in this police force, and I'll tell you why. 3 major clues have been discovered by newspaper reporters. The red van that was spotted near the place, 2 fishermen were sighted on the banks of the river, and this morning, on the front page of a newspaper, a ski glove was said to have been found in the field near to where Nicola went missing.
There was also her neighbour who explained the fact that she had the car keys in her pocket. Nobody has found the car keys.
That's right.
Why? That just felt a little bit like that press conference. No. They were covering themselves.
Hang on, right from the start, they were going on about the ball going in the river. And then I think it was the same neighbour, or it might have been a friend, said she never took the ball anymore because it made the dog too active. All the way along, they failed. Earlier, I saw a press conference... No, earlier there was a police expert who said it wasn't important to rope off the area where she went missing or to take away the bench and give it forensic examination. And I said, but there could have been a footprint in the ground near the bench, and the bench might have contained the DNA of a person sitting on the bench. Why are you telling me it was important not to investigate those? And the answer from the police was, well, that would have taken officers off the job of looking out for CCTV.
Thank you, Mike. Tom Harwood, it's been a very busy couple of hours. No doubt GBNews will continue to look at what was said in the remainder of that press conference and also to assess. Just sum up, if you will, for those who are joining us, Nicola Sturgeon, that was a shock. She's going.
She's going. She's done 8 years in the job. She's been the longest-serving, marginally, First Minister of Scotland since that devolved administration came into being in 1999. She says that she has sort of been running out of energy, that she wants to go at a time of her choosing, that she hasn't been pushed. But clearly the context around this is something that we should not ignore. The scandals that have been going on within Scotland, the public service failures, as well as that unavoidable unavoidable looking at those polls for independence crashing in recent weeks.
Thank you, Tom. No doubt you'll be sticking around on GB News for the remainder of the day. Tonya Buxton, thank you. Mike Parry, thank you. Thank you for all of your messages. I barely got through them. Lots more to come on GB News today. Here is the news with Bethany.
Bev, thank you, and a very good morning to you. It's just gone midday. I'm Bethany Elsey with your top stories from the GB newsroom. And some breaking news. Nicola Sturgeon has resigned as First Minister of Scotland after 8 years in power. Speaking at an urgent press conference at Bute House in Edinburgh, Ms Sturgeon said she was proud to have served as the first female